I saw that originally you worked at Atari as tester. So how did you start there? I mean, you went to Michigan State.
Yeah.
So how did you end up at...
Basically just responded to an ad in the paper. It said, game testers wanted, applied for the job, got the job, and started out testing Lynx games like Malibu Beach volleyball and Jimmy Connor's tennis and Lemmings and things like that. It's exciting initially, but then, the 150th time you have to play the game over, it does get a little tiring. But, it's better than real work. This was on the premises. You had to show up every day and, work your 8+ hours and make sure all the games, played well, didn't have any bugs, and, were good products. So it was interesting. Well, basically, if it was multiplayer, we didn't play on the Lynx directly, but if we were just playing in general, we actually had a special adapter that we could plug into the Lynx and get output to a TV screen. So we could play it on the TV. We just all gather around in a central area and plug our Lynxes in together and play. I guess actually, now that I think about it, we probably did play multiplayer even on the big screen just by running the cables over our cubicles. Right. I basically hit Atari right as they were moving into finishing up the Jaguar. And, after a few months of testing the Lynx stuff, well, then they started giving us Jaguar games to test, such as Cyromorph and Trevor McFur and those types of things. Other stuff to do. Oh, yes, and Dino Dudes and Raiden and all that stuff. So, yeah, I mean, one of the nice things was that due to the lack of resources, it kind of forced everybody to do a little bit more than their job description. So on things like Cyromorph, we actually laid out and designed levels for ATD to implement into the game. Basically, at the last phases of those projects, they bring the developer in and kind of lock them in a closet to finish up the programming. And basically, they needed the testers at that time to basically handle the remaining level design tasks. So that included, enemy placement, level layout, things like that.
ATD was...
Attention to detail.
Oh, that was the developer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right, yeah. And then after a certain point, I just kind of worked my way up to being a producer there and started, managing and developing my own projects. Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a lot involved. Basically, ultimately, while you're not necessarily doing any of the programming, the design, the artwork, etc., you really have to coordinate and manage all those tasks and make sure that they happen on time, on schedule. And ultimately, you have to make sure that the game is a lot of fun to play. And sometimes it's quite tricky depending on the resources that you're given with or the developer that you have to work with.
So
you need, the people skills and the management skills and the scheduling skills. Yeah, I think unfortunately, maybe Atari kind of lowballed developers, and developers would underbid, so it was like a deadly combination. Because the developers would say, oh, I can do it cheaply, and Atari would say, hey, great, you can do it cheaply. But, when that happens, they've usually put a lot of underskilled people on the teams, and it just makes the projects drag on longer than it would if they actually put people that needed to be on the team in the first place. And then you get into situations like what happened with Cybermorph, where we're actually designing levels and things like that, when those should have been designed, months before we even saw the game.
Yeah. A lot of these games that you were a producer on never got released.
Right.
This is
unfortunate.
Because, some of these sound really good, like Mortal Kombat. I assume Atari would have been the distributor.
Yeah, basically, if you look at that list, there's actually, we did 2 deals. We did 2 major deals. One was with Accolade, and with Accolade, we got titles like Bubsy, Charles Barkley Basketball, Brett Hull Hockey, and things like that. Then we did another deal with Acclaim, where we were able to get the rights to Mortal Kombat, NBA Jam, Batman Forever, and a few others in that vein. And they were pretty big deals, and it's unfortunate that, the system didn't get rolling enough to really see those projects come to reality. And, the Mortal Kombat, they had actually started a little bit of development, but it never really got all that far.
So no screens or videos or anything like that, or...
It's possible, but unfortunately none that I have. I mean, it's possible that there probably was some kind of demo for that, and it was going to be the ultimate Mortal Kombat, basically, where you've gotten,
arcade feel. Or...
Yeah, and we had a big ultimate Mortal Kombat machine at Atari that we were able to play, and that was a lot of fun.
Sure.
So there was some advantages of doing those types of projects. Same with NBA Jam. We actually got an actual NBA Jam machine in the office, and we were able to play a lot of that. And I think NBA Jam came out reasonably well.
How about Batman Forever?
I think Batman Forever really never was probably the least developed of any of those titles mentioned.
Charles Barkley basketball?
That was, that was a very difficult title to produce just due to the developer. And in some ways it was a very painful process. But I think what almost got done was, kind of interesting. It would have been nice to have actually seen that released. I'm not exactly sure what the final status of that project was, but when I left, it was almost complete. But apparently, I guess they never really got over that hump.
Same for Brett Hockey. I saw not too long ago there were one or two prototypes on eBay.
Yeah,
for sale. So apparently it looks like it's all
done. It's kind of surprising, but it's not, from my standpoint, it's not really surprising because I had to deal with the developer on those projects, and he was an extremely difficult developer to deal with. But I've seen screenshots and video, and ultimately looked like the games might have actually come out pretty good. So I guess unfortunate to the Jaguar fans out there that those games never actually made it.
How about this Wes Craven presents Mind Ripper? That's
right. Basically, it was a kind of a B movie produced by Wes Craven that we were trying to start a deal with this movie company where we would kind of develop products based on their movies, and they were ultimately a B movie companies, but they had a lot of really good contacts.
Mm-hmm.
So over time, the relationship might have actually grown reasonably well. And for me personally, it was good contacts because it led me to other work outside of Atari. But Mind Ripper would have basically been kind of a neat first-person horror shooter type game. The movie came on HBO and video a few years ago, and fairly schlocky fare, but would have made a neat game. What was cool was that they actually shot it in Bulgaria. And I went down to the set and met Lance Henriksen and hung out with the cast and crew for like a few days in Bulgaria. And, all my memories of it are actually pretty cool because we were able to go out on the set and take pictures of all the assets that they had on the set. And they gave us open access to everything, to all the actors. So we were able to get Lance Henriksen on the blue screen, and he was very helpful in getting digitizing his likeness to be in the movie. And I guess there's one of the guys that was in Saving Private Ryan, who's now almost becoming a big star, was in Mind Ripper too. So it's kind of funny seeing some of these people that you'd never heard of and that are now
big or almost
becoming big stars. So that Lance Henriksen, is just kind of a legend in that type of genre of film. But no, it was actually a lot of fun, and they were shooting in a lot of like weird, abandoned nuclear reactor type places in Bulgaria. So it was kind of creepy, but it was kind of cool running through these underground catacombs and getting all these shots. The nice thing about those places is that, the countries are so poor that they'll allow these movie companies to come in and work with their film infrastructure and then give them access to any parts of the city that they want to shoot in.
Wow.
So, it was actually kind of neat. It would have been neat to see how the final product would have come out, because ultimately there's a lot of kind of cool little things that we'd want to put into the game, like multiplayer play and things like that. So, first-person shooter. In the vein of your Dooms, we wanted to do things that, Doom had done, like the ability to, walk on ceilings and stuff like that, if you'd played the monster. Because the monster had his set of abilities, and, the human heroes had their own set of abilities, and rescue people and things like that. So we're trying to add a little bit more depth to the first-person shooter genre. And, a lot of it was probably somewhat influenced by Alien vs. Predator. And, we wanted to try to take Alien vs. Predator one step further. I actually probably have the design doc, and I probably probably had some stuff that I actually could have brought from that, but I can't really vouch for the movie too much. It's kind of Wes Craven in some respects, just giving some favors back to people that have, helped him over his career by kind of lending his name and credibility to the film. But as a game, I think it would have actually been a lot of fun because, it was right at the kind of before first-person shooters had become oversaturated, and I think we'd actually added some, unique features to the game.
Would have been CD or?
It would have been actually a CD. What we're actually trying to do is go multi. That was at the time where they wanted to get multi-platform, so there would have actually been a PC and a Jaguar CD version. And then it would have had full motion video from the film. I mean, at that time, it would have had all the kind of cool things that people were looking for.
Yeah.
That,
So I assume the PC version never got anywhere.
No, the PC version got even probably less farther than that version. A lot of things definitely got started and were seeming to move forward, and I think probably, as I remember a few years ago, there was even some probably slight litigation on trying to make sure that all the legal loose ends got tied up, just due to the fact that Atari was no more or less, and I think people want to make sure that they got their cuts, or at least could work stuff out.
Mm.
But yeah, definitely got started, and I think it was actually planned on kind of being the first in a multi-game series with the company, and the company has
Do you remember the name of the company?
Kushner Lock.
Oh, that sounds pretty cool though.
Yeah, on paper comes out. Sounded pretty neat.
It looks like you guys did a whole lot of work on that before it actually shot video and stuff. So
yeah, I mean, it would have been pretty innovative, I think, for its time.
How about Black Ice, White Noise?
Well, that was meant to be kind of the big Atari internally produced big epic game that was going to put Atari back on the map. It basically started from Sam Trammell, the president of Atari, kind of mandating that we create our own Sonic, Mario type iconic character. And basically what had happened was we went through many iterations of these kind of really lame mascot characters, from ducks to alligators to armadillos, that were just all very ridiculous.
You've heard of Arlo, Armadillo versus the Bugs Below.
Yeah, I think that was actually another one of BJ's creations from that, and I don't know. I don't think nobody was ever terribly enthused by all these kind of ridiculous, biped mascot things, and we wanted to do something a little bit edgier, so we came up with this concept, Black Ice, White Noise, which was, a very innovative concept at the time. In many realities, it was like the Matrix. I mean, before the Matrix had even come out, it more or less embodied that cyberpunk hacker archetype that Keanu Reeves played in the movie. We had another guy whose name Chris Hudak, who's another kind of video game journalist, and he writes for occasionally writes for Next Gen and Wired, Playboy, and whomever else will pay for his flights to freelance. Yeah. So basically, we had created this kind of whole world, which was involved hacking and infiltration and going into cyberspace, very much like the Matrix. I mean, it's probably scary how similar the two actually are. But I mean, Matrix, it was all based a lot on like William Gibson, Neuromancer, cyberpunk stuff. So, but yeah, we had done a lot of film production on that in terms of shooting people on blue screen and treadmills, and it basically was a game that incorporated driving, fighting, exploration, and all kinds of things like that into one big package. And it was a third person. I mean, one of the things that we didn't want to make it was a first person shooter because we wanted to have the character come out, and the best way to do that was third person. So basically, this was going to be a third person game before third-person games were big, like Tomb Raider, and still embodied a lot of those types of elements into the game. And so you'd be able to walk down a city street, and if you wanted to hijack a car, you could get in that car and start driving through the city, and maybe the cops would chase you. Or if you needed to hack into some place, you could hack into something, and then you'd be in cyberspace. So it Obviously, probably way too ambitious for the limited resources that we had, but it was very good to give it a try. I mean, had a lot of cutting edge techniques in terms of integrating 3D and video and digitized graphics into a game. And in theory, it would have come out pretty well. It was a very big project for Atari at the time.
So it was CD based, right?
It was CD based, yeah.
So what happened to it? Atari decided.
I think basically towards the end, I don't really have a timeline there, but there's a certain point in time where things were just kind of spiraling downhill, and there's a lot of cost cutting and layoffs, and this desperate attempt to really get into the PC market, which never really took off or happened. And the bulk of the projects there, all the really cool stuff that I was working on, most of those, kind of fell by the wayside, which was pretty unfortunate. Some of the easier projects like the Bubsy and the NBA Jam, those things actually, they came out okay and they were done, but the more ambitious projects were more or less just kind of dropped.
Yeah.
No, clearly hindsight is 2020, but when you look at some of the stuff, it was a lot of the concepts that we had thought of are now the concepts of today. So, yeah, so in many ways we're very ahead of our time, but, didn't really do us any good.
Yeah.
But it was fun. It was fun to fly down to do the video shoots and just kind of learn that whole process of integrating digital video into computer games was very educational. So, from a learning experience standpoint and from a fun experience standpoint, it was great. I really have, very, very few regrets, if any. There are, a lot of difficulties, but, the knowledge and the experience was great.
What was that shot of Black Ice?
Basically, we went down to LA and just rented a studio, and they just kind of cranked out, preset all of the motion patterns that we need. Like walk forward, walk backwards, left, right, up, down, climb, duck, shoot, punch, kick, and just kind of just plowed through it, on treadmills and blue screens. Well, basically, what we would do is we just shoot everything against a blue screen and then digitize all those, cut them out, and then make our sprites based on those actions.
Okay.
So basically, it was done in a similar way to Mortal Kombat, basically.
Okay, yeah.
Kind of the same thing, except we were going for more of a 3D feel, so clearly we had to shoot all of the rotations so that it appeared that you existed in this 3D world.
We had a body instead of stuff.
But it was a real person. Chris Hudak was kind of the star of the whole thing. And then we actually hired, I can't remember her name, but ironically, a lot of these things are interconnected. The people that put us in contact with the Mind Ripper people were also some of the people that shot the video for Black Ice. And they had a contact with, actually what we did was, in many ways, a very open casting call, because a lot of these things were, not only was there just basic motions and combat and running and walking, a lot of it was actual video. So when the character would come up to somebody, you could have a conversation, and they'd play that conversation, and you could respond, positive, negative, or, neutral. And based on that, you get different responses. So the person actually did respond, so we actually needed actors. And, while we never got anybody huge, we did get a kind of a cult martial artist from Hong Kong that had been in a few big martial arts movies out in Hong Kong. And she was basically just trying to break into the U.S. market and just thought it would be fun, And, that was cool. It was cool getting semi-name, well, I don't know if it was a name brand to anybody else but a few hardcore martial art film fans, but, it was a neat process to go through the auditions. Like I said before, the experience was great, and it gave really good broad insight to producing, a huge, expansive product that involved a lot of different elements.
So you were there at Atari, and, you'd doing your producing job, and then you kind of see how everything slowly starts to kind of go downhill.
Yeah, well, to be perfectly honest, I think from the beginning, I think everybody, there was a lot of flaws in the Jaguar, and Atari was not really known for their marketing, I don't think anybody had any real illusions on how long it would last. But, I think everybody got along, or a lot of the people got along, so it was a very fun and exciting place to hang out and try to do cool stuff. And, it was good while it lasted. I guess basically what happened, as Atari started going downhill, when I first arrived at Atari, they were laying people off, and just all the time I would be there, they would cut costs every so often, just kick people out the door, and it created this weird revolving door environment, and one day my number came up, and, I was gone. And then, and then basically I went to work with Optical Entertainment, and these were guys that were obviously related somewhat to the Mind Ripper people loosely, because the president of Optical Entertainment had actually worked at Disney with Tron when Tron was being done, did a whole bunch of stuff with Disney. And so basically it's part of a bigger company called Hyperion Entertainment, and they're known for stuff like Brave Little Toaster, Baby's Kids. They're kind of they're not Disney, they're not Warner Brothers, but they did Life with Louie. They do a lot of Saturday morning and HBO independent animated product, and they wanted to break into video games. So I kind of hooked up with them, and we tried creating this game, Dead Ahead. But one of the unfortunate things about that is they use kind of a movie model for producing the game, and I don't know if that was necessarily worked the best, because we're getting financing from Japan, and then we're using external developer Software Creations, and so the trick was to coordinate all of these things together, and didn't get coordinated very well.
What system was that intended for?
It was actually for the N64.
Okay.
And, it was a cool game, but I think ultimately the money from Japan, which was by Tomy, they had a, changeover of management, and it was, I think, very tough to, they do video games in Japan, and they had a connection, and, I think, and it was an interesting type of deal, but basically I was responsible for the design of the game, not necessarily the overall production of the game. And so it was kind of tough for everything to get held together, and eventually that one just kind of ran out of steam, which was unfortunate. But again, it was another great experience. It was for an N64 game. Mm-hmm. I mean, the demo that we were able to put together looked pretty nice, and I think would have been a great. But ultimately, I think we kind of ran out of financing, and the developer was difficult at times as well.
That seems to be a prevailing theme.
Yeah, that's a prevailing theme of the software industry, is difficult developers. Yeah, I think really that's one of the main challenges in the software development industry, at least in the gaming industry. I suspect it's probably somewhat similar in the more straight forms of software development as well, but clearly in the game industry you're going to have a lot more unique personalities, and sometimes, it presents a lot of unique challenges in coordinating and motivating and managing people, but a lot of it does come down to how the projects are started and funded, and if basically people underbid to get a project, that's usually a sure sign that things, especially for an original product that's not a port or conversions from something else, or a movie license tie-in, it's going to be very difficult to get a cutting-edge, innovative, original product if you don't really invest both the time and the money to make sure that it comes out great. Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things I've noticed is that if you go to other countries like the UK especially, and it's probably changing somewhat, but when I first started in this industry, basically, game programmers there were making, maybe, £17,000-18,000 a year, and, that was kind of entry level, and the owners of the company were charging maybe $200,000 or $150,000 to develop these projects, and basically the owner would take 75% of the contract money off the top, and just put his lowest quality people or most junior people on the product, and it was always just kind of a recipe for disaster. And I think that's one of the problems with the video game industry, is this kind of definitely underbidding and under allocating the resources and time for projects, and just kind of bites you in the ass at the end of the day, because people run out of money, and or if they're not running out of money, they are shopping products around to other publishers and thus not giving your product enough time that it needs to be nurtured and developed.
Well, at Atari, did you work at any other games that are not on this list, or any other public?
At Atari, we got the Supercross and Baldies. I mean, peripherally, I probably maybe lended a comment or two to things like Club Drive or Aliens versus Predator, things like that, but didn't really have any kind of significant involvement in those projects.
Besides Lynx and Jaguar, did you ever do any other Atari developments or testing or any?
Nothing significant. I saw the Falcon, maybe puttered around or tinkered with it for a little bit, but that's really the extent of things. Never really got into much of the computer stuff. Saw them, might have used them once or twice. The early Jaguar developments were Atari TTs, which made it really very difficult for people to really, take the platform seriously and actually get a lot of wide third-party support, because there were machines that, sold about 6 units worldwide and nobody had them. So it made development pretty tough from that standpoint. And then when they did get them, people weren't really familiar with the TOS operating system that people were kind of forced to use to develop their products with. So that was another, I think, stumbling block that Atari made, was, this not going to PCs right off the bat, but by using, their own proprietary computer hardware, which, nobody else in the world used but them, and, maybe 6 guys in Europe.
Did you work with their development systems at all? Or?
Just basically to load games, load artwork, and things like that. Not from an overly technical standpoint, just from a management standpoint of making sure all the assets of the game were working and functioning and things like that.
You went to Nintendo, and
actually I was at SegaSoft before Nintendo. Yeah.
Oh, how did that happen?
Basically, after this project wound down, a lot of the Atari. Actually, after Atari started to wind down, a lot of the Atari people went various places. A few people ended up at Sony, and a few people ended up at SegaSoft, and eventually I joined some of the ones and ended up at SegaSoft. And we started this another really cutting-edge game that never really got off the ground, unfortunately, and that was a massively multiplayer online title called Skies. It was basically a world that kind of revolved around floating islands and creatures that had wings, like angels, demons, and it was a fantasy RPG, but it was not in the traditional fantasy mold like your Ultimas and things like that. It was actually a very innovative take on it. Basically, when you started the game, you started off as a newborn. That's kind of how your character would exist initially, which wasn't like a baby, but that's just what we call it. So it's like a younger adventurer, maybe, teenager. But as the game progressed, as you gained more experience and spent more time online, your power would increase. Yeah, and you spent more money. Your powers would increase. You would actually age throughout this world. So you go from a newborn to like a teenager to an adult to an elder. So this way you could actually visually see who has actually played the game and who was more powerful. And what was kind of funny, we also adapt, and 3 or 4 years ago when we came up with these ideas, they were actually seen as being crazy. But when you look at how EverQuest and Ultima Online, how they've kind of spawned this other e-commerce model, it's actually kind of sad that we didn't do it, because when you first started the game, to equip your character, basically you had to buy these things called Lidos, which were limited edition digital objects. So maybe you start the game, say you started as an angel, you'd have your basic bow. And when you fired your bow, that would be your basic attack. But if you wanted something stronger, like, say, a fireball or a lightning bolt or a faster flight, you had to purchase these, like, booster packs of digital objects. And so, say you buy a lightning bolt and faster flight, you could equip those. So, in effect, every character could be equipped with different things, thus even more unique. And what's kind of interesting is now that I work at Nintendo and I realize the underlying concepts of Pokemon are basically the same concepts that we had, because what we really wanted to do was foster a community and have people trade. So basically, if I had my angel, I played for 6 months, so I had like an adult angel that was equipped with lightning bolt, fireball, and faster flight and invisibility. I could trade that for, say, I want to play like a bad guy now. I could trade that for a demon, and those are the same kind of concepts. And And one of the things is that everything would be limited. So basically, say there was like, we'd sold like 1 million copies or something, but maybe there would only be 500,000 lightning bolts. So that would increase the value of the lightning bolt. So if I wanted to trade for a lightning bolt, I might have to add something else to the pot to make it a more compelling trade.
So and these Lidos, you actually paid them in real money?
Yeah, you bought. I mean, it seemed like a ridiculous concept like a few years ago when people were paying thousands of dollars for their Ultima Online stuff. It's actually kind of funny just how right we actually were. And so basically, they were like booster packs, like Magic the Gathering. You'd say, okay, when you start the game, maybe you buy the game off the shelf for like $39.95. So we toss in half a dozen of these Lidos or something. Let's say you didn't get anything you want for like $2 or whatever.
Pay more.
Right. For $2, you can get like a booster pack, and maybe there'd be 5 or 6 of these Lidos in there. Then you can kind of buy as many as you want till you get the right combination of whatever you want. And then you could go online and participate in this world, which was similar to EverQuest and Ultima Online, and basically everything in the world revolved around magic. And so all your powers were based on magic. And we did a lot of very unique things, like to get around a lot of player killing, we made safe zones. It was like a globe, but it wasn't really a globe because everything in the world was floating. So if you stayed at the top of the world, there was not enough magic so that you could actually fight. So there's nothing you could really do but just hang out, talk, converse, trade. But the further you went down in the world, the more magic power you got, the more you could actually fight and journey with other people and things like that. So, I mean, it's kind of sad that one didn't take off as well, because there's a lot of, it was very ahead of its time, and there's like a lot of unique concepts and innovative things that everybody else seems to be doing today. One of the things that we tried to do with Skies was, the person that formed this group, he had another game called 10-6, which actually now is just coming to fruition. And that was another game that was a massively multiplayer game that used these Lidos. So, in some way, the Lidos thing is actually going to happen. But what we wanted to do was, foster a lot of community so that everybody would buy Skies and 10-6. So you could actually trade your Skies Lidos for 10-6. You couldn't use them in the game, but it would all be kind of currency within the community for the Heat network, which was what these were being made, which is Segasoft's network. Segasoft's online network is Heat.net, and we're actually supplying content for Heat.net. So,
what console was it for?
It was for PC.
PC.
Yeah, it was for Heat.net, which was Segasoft's online network. It's still around today, but 10-6 is just coming out, and there was another one called Vigilance, but that didn't really take advantage of any of this other. And it's like a huge real-time strategy game that's on 24/7, and they want 1 million people to participate. But yeah, I think Skies was a really cool game. We had comic book artist Michael Turner, who currently does Fathom, but did Witchblade at the time. He did all of our character designs. Paradigm, who developed Pilot Wings for the N64 and a few other N64 games. We're doing all of the development and the programming. So it was a very cool concept, but I don't think Segasoft didn't really support it enough, and just kind of, now nobody's there, Nobody of our group is actually there anymore. I mean, Heat.net continues on, but everybody's kind of got dissipated throughout the industry. But again, it was another great experience, and another really cool, innovative game that unfortunately never came out. But actually, if you go to skies.net, you can read a little bit about it.
From there, you went then to Nintendo. And what do you do there today?
And ironically, I've probably released almost more titles at Nintendo in the year I've been there than any other place. And they're good titles. Basically, I'm at Nintendo now, and for the moment, I'm just doing a lot of Game Boy development. Last year, the first title I released was a great conversion of R-Type called R-Type DX, which combined R-Type 1 and R-Type 2.
For the color
Game Boy. And kind of, we presented in a unique fashion, so once you finished R-Type 1, the game would click right over into R-Type 2. And so we call that DX mode, but you could play both games separately. I mean, the bad thing about R-Type is that it's just a ridiculously difficult game to play. It's just criminally difficult, and the hardcore fans like it. And I think if you're a big shooter fan, you'll love it. But it is very difficult. But the conversion came out excellent. I mean, I wouldn't say it's arcade perfect because it's on a Game Boy, but it definitely pushes the Game Boy's potential to the max, and came out really nice. And then the next game that I did was one called Bionic Commando, which is based on the classic Capcom game from the 80s. And that just came out really well. It was an excellent game. I mean, it probably, in terms of gameplay, probably surpasses, in many respects, the NES version of Bionic Commando and Game Boy versions. I mean, it came out really well. It's in the Game Boy Color as well. It came out in January. And, it's got digitized speech, a lot of color, great animation, great fluid, lifelike animation. So that came out well. And then I've got another conversion coming up called Crystallis, which is based on another old, came out in the late 80s. It was kind of another kind of Zelda clone, but it achieved a lot of cult notoriety just due to its long, involved gameplay, and just due to some of the kind of quirky flaws that it had. It had a bad translation because of the original Japanese game, and the fact that they never actually made art assets for many of the things that you have to find. So you could spend days walking along a plane trying to find this object that you need to return to a guy in the town. So, I mean, people put up with a lot of its kind of quirky inconsistencies, but in this new version, we've added some additional levels. We've tightened up the story so it's a lot more coherent, and put all those invisible objects into the game so you can actually see with graphics, so you can actually see where you're supposed to go on those. And no, I mean, I think all these games have come out really well. And the next one I've got coming up is called Warlocked, and it's a brand new type of game for Game Boy Color. It's a real-time strategy game. It actually plays really well. It's kind of set in a medieval fantasy world. You can choose to either play the humans or the beasts, and basically just try to, conquer each other. I mean, there's resource management. You gotta, build up a little town and mine the gold and mine the fuel, so you can build your armies up. And one of the unique things that we've added to the game is that we've got these wizards. And in true Pokemon-like fashion, not everybody will get every wizard in the game, thus forcing the player to trade. So if I have the Fire Wizard, you have the Bomb Wizard, and I want the Bomb Wizard, I can trade my Fire Wizard for your Bomb Wizard.
So you hook up, two players hook up.
Right, two players hook up.
Give you this and that.
Yeah, and another unique thing that we've added to this game is when you play through the basic levels, say you've got 10 archers, 3 knights, and 2 wizards left. When you play through the game, you'll start stockpiling all these excess troops and assets. And then you can kind of trade with your friend these little stat-based army cards. So I can say, I played for a week. I can trade you my army, my excess army that I stored up. And then say you played for a week or two. And then you can, on your machine, you can have this little animated statistic battle where you can set the amount of troops, and I can set the amount of troops that you want to fight against, and they'll just do this little stat-based thing. And it's just kind of a neat little mini-game to give people an incentive to play through the game multiple times and try to be more efficient and see how many troops that they can actually survive each level with. And then they can just send them to their friends and see who's the better general, I guess. So it's a neat little game. That should be out hopefully sometime in the summer.
So what about that Game Boy Advanced?
From what I've seen so far, it looks great. Game Boy Color has been a huge, huge success for the company. So, at the moment, I'm not sure what the launch plans are for it. But when it does show up, it's gonna be great.
What do you think about the video games right now? I mean, compared to back then, Jaguar.
No, I think the video games right now, on average, are they're better for the most part. I mean, I know probably the primary audience reading this is the retro gamer. But, I play a lot of the retro games too, but I don't know if they necessarily have the longevity in the gameplay. I mean, you take something like Bionic Commando, which you can fondly remember as being this really awesome game.
Oh, yeah.
You pop that baby in today, and it's just really difficult to play. The controls are very awkward, the animation's very limited, and it's very difficult. I mean, I've only learned this through redoing it, and when we did our new version, I mean, you can pull off these complicated drop swings and do all kinds of fancy tricks that it would be extremely difficult to do in the original versions. And if you go back and you look at them, you just look at the limited frames of animation and the really kind of sticky controls, whereas the games of today have great fluid, lifelike animation, great controls. I mean, you can, the racing games today, you can turn on a dime, and it's just, I think the technology has really allowed the game designers and developers to really come out with some really awesome stuff. Sure, there's, crappy games, but, there always were crappy games, but I think the games of today are really leaps and bounds better. And clearly a lot of that's come from the influence of the games of yesterday, but I think if you go back to some of the old games, the average person, they probably won't be as cool as they necessarily remember them. And, sometimes, the memory of something is a lot better than the reality.
Sure.
We've got, Nintendo has, many ways of gauging quality control. We've got our famous Mario Club, which really has to evaluate, every game that comes through it, from third-party games to our own games, to make sure that they all make the grade. Because at the end of the day, I mean, what happens is Acclaim can release some crappy game, but the purchaser is not going to call Acclaim, they're going to call us. So we have to make sure that, and they're going to hold us responsible in many cases, so we have to make sure everything kind of meets our standards of quality.
Do you still have any contact to former buddies from Atari?
Basically see them at trade shows. Last week was the Computer Game Developers Conference. Saw all the old Atari people like, Don Thomas and James Grunke and a lot of the guys that I worked with before. And it was cool seeing them. Yeah. I mean, a lot of them were actually at Nuon, which is kind of the next generation Jaguar. I really don't know how that will fare. I mean, I guess they've got a good system of getting it packaged and bundled into DVD systems, and that's kind of an interesting philosophy, and we'll see how that works. I mean, I think unfortunately their technology is, just kind of a little bit better than the original Jaguar, and it's not really going to be competitive with, the next generation Nintendo systems or Dreamcast or Sony or Xbox. And I think that'll be somewhat limiting on there, and as kind of a novelty of getting this game thing in your DVD player, they might sell a few units of software here and there, but it's not going to be the critical mass. I mean, like Nintendo, everything must sell in the millions, otherwise it's like viewed as kind of really disappointment at times. And, I don't think that new one's really going to get that kind of critical mass of buyers of their software, but who knows, PlayStation 2 so far today is very underwhelming. Ridge Racer, Street Fighter EX3, Tekken Tag are all slightly nicer version of their PlayStation counterparts, and does it, as an American, does it justify the $1,000+ that'll probably cost you to import the thing? I think the only kind of interesting thing that it has might allow you to play multi-region DVD game or DVD movies, only by accident, and that's for the people that are interested in renting or buying European or Japanese DVDs. Yeah. So you're talking a very small segment, and I think one thing that PlayStation has on its side is this massive hype machine, and that the reality of the system as it stands today is not going to filter down to the average PlayStation fan. But they're going to be, unless the American software kicks ass, they're going to be sorely disappointed when they pop in their discs and it's slightly prettier version of the old games. And I mean, Dead or Alive for Dreamcast came out this week, and it's comparable visually to Tekken Tag. And I think Sony boxed themselves into a corner with the limited amount of RAM as well as a multi-processor gaming unit. At the Game Developers Conference, they had the founders of Naughty Dog who did Crash Bandicoot come out and talk about how programming the VPU for the PlayStation 2 was a challenge, and people should think of it like a puzzle. But if I wanted to do a puzzle, I'd get the New York Times crossword out or something, and not. I mean, I think that's kind of what killed Saturn was this kind of and Jaguar was a very difficult way of programming the chips, and you have these multiple processors, and it's not straightforward. And sure, there's a few people out there that are going to be able to maximize and think that it's cool, but video games have become such a business and an industry that you need kind of a reliable way of scheduling and then delivering product to the consumer. And if you make the system too complicated, no matter how powerful it's going to be, it's just going to screw you up in the end because people aren't going to be able to make their deadline, or they're just going to use such a minimal part of the machine's power that, you know, the games are just going to come out as being very average and mediocre, and probably fall into one of the subtle things about the first PlayStation was that it was easy to program for, but the downside of that was that it made everything look very generic and very similar. And so there was not a lot, in my mind, there's not a lot of uniqueness to PlayStation stuff. There are a lot of PlayStation games come off as just kind of being very bland and very samey, and there's just way too many of them. But, you know, I guess that worked to their advantage, but I see probably a similar thing happening with PlayStation 2, except all the games, while they may all look the same, they're probably not all going to look all that great. And then, you know, at the Game Developers Conference, they had Shenmue, and I don't know if you played any of Shenmue. I mean, it's great. I mean, PlayStation 2, when they gave their keynote, they ran some video of some of the upcoming games, and these were unpopulated worlds. I admit they were early prototypes, but they had people walking through fields of unpopulated places and things like that. And then when you look at Shenmue, you're like walking through an actual city. There's people walking down, bumping into you, people that you can talk to. You can go to any store. And Shenmue's created a really good world. And the models are great. The models look as good as anything I've seen on PlayStation 2 so far. And, you know, Shenmue was, you know, a couple-year-old technology, to, you know, when it's all said and done. Yeah. And, you know, PlayStation 2, I think, actually almost has a little bit of catch-up to do even with the Dreamcast. And I think Sega has a great opportunity now that I think people will be exposing some of PlayStation's weaknesses, that, you know, if they come out with a really good marketing campaign, they probably have a chance to actually drive a wedge for the next 6 months until, you know, the new Nintendo platform comes out or whenever. No, I think the new Nintendo stuff, I mean, is going to probably be very, very cool. I mean, I think what will be Microsoft's challenge when they enter this thing is a lack of content. I mean, one thing that we have at Nintendo, and we've got, I mean, while we may not have Microsoft money, one thing that we do have is great content. And we've got Pokemon, Mario, and Zelda. And those are the games and experiences that people are going to really want to get into. And Sega's got a lot of that too, with their arcade division and Sonic. And that's something that Sony's been desperately trying to get, and they've come out with a few franchises, but not the first-party franchises that Nintendo has, like Mario and Pokemon and things like that. So it'll be a very interesting race, and, you know, who can really predict? But I know that we have a lot of good content in our corner.
So when you compare that in the video game industry today to how things were back then at Atari, what's like the first thing that comes to mind? As in a lot more professional or a lot more?
At the end of the day, you know, it's all it's kind of similar, and that's kind of what's kind of creepy about it from my standpoint. It's like a lot of the people are the same. It's all very similar. The issues are still the same. I think that hopefully, I mean, I think PlayStation's probably done an excellent job at creating really good tool sets for the developer, which is good. But that's really the only thing that's changed. It's probably slightly easier. But even when things are easier, the scope of the project expands. So it's kind of 6 on one hand, half a dozen on the other. From my standpoint, it's not terribly different. And, you know, admittedly, Atari was a very small company, and we were able to probably talk people into allowing everybody to bite off more than we as a company or as a person could chew. Or like now I'm at Nintendo, and Nintendo is definitely a little bit more conservative. So it'd be very difficult for me to walk into Nintendo and pitch something like Black Ice, White Noise, or Mind Ripper or something, just because, you know, they have a more conservative mindset. But, you know, in Japan, Mr. Miyamoto is probably making the next Zelda or something, or the next Mario or what have you, or any games that they're going to make in Japan, because they've got a proven track record, are allowed to be a lot more expansive than maybe the ones that, you know, I myself, being new at the company, could make. So it's not to say that the games aren't. It's just that, you know, at my position in Nintendo today, I couldn't walk in there and do that. Other people are. I mean, we've got some really fantastic, expansive projects, but it's a different company, and my position's kind of different, so I couldn't necessarily do these same things. I think it's all what comes down to the consumer. I think that people have embraced a lot of the online stuff, so clearly online is going to be a very viable direction just based on the consumer response. and the fact that people are becoming a lot more online savvy. Beyond that, I really can't say. I think ultimately it's all content, and it just, the delivery method may or may not change. Back in the day, people were predicting the death of the console, and that PC would be, rule the video game world. But you know what? It's a completely different gaming experience between playing a game on a PC and playing a game on a console. And I think people are pretty much used to different devices doing different things, at least at the moment. I don't think people want to play their video game on their microwave or something ridiculous like that. And I think that whatever happens, it can go in many different permutations of one big box that does it, or still like we have today, many different little boxes that do it. At the end of the day, it's going to be content and the games that people want to play, and they have to be made by creative people to make exciting experiences, and that's really what it comes down to. I mean, supposedly in Japan, they said that a lot of people are buying the PlayStation 2 primarily for DVD, because DVD players are expensive there. I don't know the truth to that, and we'll see how that type of model flies here, but I don't know how many people play their CDs on their current PlayStations. I mean, when the cost of a DVD player gets down to $150, there's really no reason to have a DVD player in your PlayStation. It would be nice once or twice when somebody's using your other DVD player, or you're traveling or something, and you want this kind of multi-purpose thing. But overall, as I said before, it's content. People will find various methods of delivering that content, but at the end of the day, it's really the content. Yeah, no, it's a fun, exciting industry. You get to travel a lot. You get to meet a lot of people. It's not really as easy as people might think. I mean, because ultimately, you're a person and you're responsible for, at times, millions of dollars worth of development, but the potential to make many more millions of dollars. So in many ways, the responsibility and the stress level is actually pretty high, which is something people don't think about. They just think, oh, you're just goofing off playing video games. But at the end of the day, there's really a lot that goes into it, and from the animation to the control to the design to the music to the sound effects, and making all that happen is actually quite a challenging task, and you really need to keep track of a lot of different things. And it's a fun industry, but it's also very, very challenging.